what's your stance today as to what the government are proposing to do? What do you plan to say on that?
Well, we'll be voting against the protocol bill today simply because it is breaking an international treaty, an international commitment that Britain signed into law. But also, we have to understand that everything in this bill, bar one or two items, is perfectly negotiable. We don't have to put a wrecking ball through the deal in order to deliver for the British economy and also for the Northern Ireland economy, which is what this is really concerning. But also we have to bear in mind, Eamon, that just 2 years ago, Boris Johnson negotiated this deal. He was the one that proposed it to the European Union, insisted it be part of the deal and negotiated it into the treaty. He then said it was a great deal for the British public and British businesses. And then in the manifesto that he stood on, that he drafted and he put to the people, he said there would be no renegotiation. And now they're seeking to break the law, pull out unilaterally of their own deal, and they're saying because the EU won't renegotiate fully. So I think there's a lot of confusion at the moment, and the rest of the world that we're now trying to do deals with elsewhere are looking on aghast at what's happening and the way that Britain is behaving, and they're seeing an untrustworthy country. So the Labour Party wants to restore trust to our international partnerships. We want to make sure that we're a country that people can do deals with and know that when we sign a deal, we stick to it.
But Peter, you could look at it another way. You could look at it that this is all talk and it will be no action from the government. It's to give them a stronger hand. It's to say to the EU, look, we mean business on this. We could go further. We don't want to go further. But, you know, give us a bit of ground here. Surely it's just a negotiating tactic.
Well, the EU does need to be more flexible, and we've said that from the outset. But let's be really clear, the way you put pressure on the EU is to get round the table and out-negotiate them. You don't just stay away from negotiations and then pass a law that unilaterally withdraws from them. Because I think, as we've seen, actually, with Vladimir Putin, that the EU doesn't respond to threats. Actually, it rises to threats. Actually, that's the way that Britain responds. I mean, if the EU, for example, was to unilaterally pass legislation to pull out of the deals it signed and commitments it signed with the UK, how would we respond? I don't think this is the way that we do things with our global partners. The EU is one of many global partners, and whether we're talking about our relationships with the US or the EU or other of our global partners, I don't think the way that we are acting unilaterally, passing legislation that pulls out of our international commitments, which we only signed 2 years ago, is the way forward. If we just bear in mind that we're trying to sign a deal at the moment with India, a comprehensive trade deal, India is now looking at us thinking, well, if we sign a deal with them, in 2 years' time, are they just going to pull out of the bits that they don't like? Actually, what we have to do is stick up for the rule of law, because that is the British way. We make sure that we negotiate our way out, because everything, Eamon, in this deal is negotiable. Bear in mind, if you don't mind, that the last generation under Tony Blair, they delivered peace in Northern Ireland through the most extraordinary statecraft and negotiation. This generation under Boris Johnson, they can't even get a prawn sandwich across the Irish Sea. That's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about big issues. We're talking about individual items of goods, which we just need to get an individual deal through so that it smooths the passage across the Irish Sea. This should be very within the bounds of what's negotiable by all the standards that Britain has.
Peter Carl, I've just been reading Matt Hancock, of course, who is former Health Secretary. He presided over a lot of the vaccine rollout and talks extensively in a piece in the Times today about the problems he encountered because of the very rigid interpretation from the European Union of the protocol and the problems with getting medicines into Northern Ireland. And he says quite clearly this legislation does not break the law. Why? Well, it's quite simply really outlined very clearly by the necessity principle, where there's a clash of two agreements, a nation-state can decide which one it follows. To suggest the UK is doing something illegal risks harming one of our most important friendships. What do you say to that?
Well, firstly, it's interesting that he uses the example of medicine, because we came to an agreement with the EU back at Christmas on medicines. So medicines is no longer an issue in Northern Ireland. How did we come to that? We negotiated. But it also points to how they failed, because they couldn't actually get to an agreement, because the UK couldn't agree to sign on the document. So the EU and the UK both unilaterally published legislation which agreed with each other. But medicine, it was a slightly dysfunctional agreement, but medicine is no longer an issue. On the issue about the legal status of necessity, let's be really clear. The last time that Britain used necessity as a legal argument was back in 1969, when we had to take military action against forcible action against an oil tanker that was threatening the environment. So what that means is that the British state has no alternative at all. Very hard to say that necessity is the legal basis on a deal that we signed and negotiated ourselves. Nobody forced us. There was no pressure on Britain other than our own pressure. We voluntarily entered a legal agreement. So to say that necessity is the legal basis for this is very hard to say.
Well, you will also know, as Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary, that there are a lot of people in Northern Ireland who are very happy with the protocol as it exists. And therefore, I'm having this painted as a solely economic problem isn't actually totally true. This is a political problem of which the government are helping the Democratic Unionist Party out of a hole on this one, because this brings, or the threat is that it brings Irish unification much closer.
Well, you're completely right that because the government have been so unsuccessful in negotiations, and it's been, for most of the time, hasn't actually engaged in negotiations, bearing in mind it's been almost 2.5 months since the UK even had a conversation officially with the EU about progress. Because of the lack of progress, then, of course, political unrest has been fermented, and distrust in the protocol and frustration at the lack of progress on the unionist side. Now, what we have to do is recognise this. I understand that the unionists see the protocol as an existential threat, and we have to engage with them on their own terms on this. What the DUP have always said is they want negotiated progress, but they want solid progress in order to assure them that into the future, any barriers in the Irish Sea become almost non-existent. And I believe that is negotiable over a solid period of time. But yes, Liz Truss has said that she's taking this unilateral action because the protocol has lost consent of one of the communities. And bearing in mind, because of power sharing, both the nationalist and the unionist communities have a power of veto over the executive in Northern Ireland.
Look,
but let's be really clear. The DUP voted against the protocol in the first place, so it never had consent from the DUP. So the government is picking up the Good Friday Agreement when it suits it, and it's putting it down and ignoring it when it doesn't. That's part of the problem we have now.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.